Hello to all and welcome to the first of our series, Get to Know Duxbury Beach Reservation. My name's Ted Devnew and I'll be your host this session. I've been a trustee of the reservation for 10 years and I'm pleased to tell you that the organization has never been stronger. We have solid leadership, a great staff team, and a number of projects which are in varying stages of conception, permitting, planning, and fundraising. As someone who grew up in Duxbury and also raised our family here, I recognize how Duxbury Beach defines our town, defines our bay, and much of the way we live our life. The DBR's mission is to preserve and protect this natural resource for future generations. And it's important that we have the support of our community. And that's why we have launched this Get to Know DBR series. It gives you a chance to ask questions, to hear the answers direct from the source. As soon as we're able, we'll move this series to an in-person event. Tonight, we're going to spend about 30 minutes asking and answering some questions. I'm joined by Chris Latazzi, the first executive director of the reservation. For the first 97 years, this organization was managed by volunteers, but rising sea levels and a greater intensity of storms really highlighted the need for professional management. In June of 2017, Chris joined DBR, and it's been a whirlwind journey for her and the reservation since then. So please join me in welcoming Chris. You've got a very complicated and challenging job. And we really appreciate and respect the job you've done so far. So welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Ted, and thank you for all of your volunteer service over the years with Duxbury Beach Reservation. As you said, I joined DBR in the summer of 2017, and it's been action-packed for the last 3.5 years and really shows no signs of slowing down. In fact, I think I might be speeding up. But I'm excited to take this time and speak to folks and answer some of the questions. Everybody joins and loving Duxbury Beach for a multitude of ways, and it's great to be able to have conversations with folks about how some of it works and why it runs the way it does and answer questions.
Well, great, Chris. We might as well dive in here. I sorted the questions by topics, and I'll ask you a few questions under each topic. The first is the Coastal Ecology Program. Can you explain exactly what that is?
Sure. The reservation has two main factors of its mission: maintain the landform, or where the footprint of the sand is, and to protect the ecology. Most folks are familiar with the listed bird species and the endangered species program on Duxbury Beach, but they may not be familiar with that the endangered species program is really a part of the ecology work that's done on the beach. The Coastal Ecology Program encompasses planting vegetation, which millions of people, I think, in the town have participated and helped us with. It also is removing invasive species such as Japanese knotweed, so it doesn't take over the beach, and also doing surveys of animals so we understand how they utilize the beach and where they're sheltering, foraging, breeding, raising young. And that tells us what really the health of the coastal habitats are on the beach.
Okay, well, let me go back to the first thing you said, which was the birds. Why do we have so much protection for the birds? I know that's a bit of a loaded question, but if you can explain kind of where we are with that program, that'd be great.
Absolutely. That's just the second question. Let's just dive into the birds, huh? So we have two listed species on Duxbury Beach. We have the piping plover that's listed on the federal and state level as threatened. And then we have the least tern that's listed on the state level. The key thing is our beach is so narrow and we have a roadway running through the middle of it that the entire site is considered habitat. Other sites in Massachusetts have a wider beach. So if birds are in one area, they have the luxury of saying, don't go left, go right at this area. We don't have that luxury because the beach is so narrow. So we're not able to direct vehicles around certain habitat areas. What we do have is a state permit, which allows us to have recreational activity on the site. And that means that it allows us to drive on our roadway use the parking lots and have driving on Oceanside Beach, because even those parking lots are considered habitat because it's between the habitat because it's such a narrow beach. But that permit comes with a laundry list of requirements. And we not only have to demonstrate that we have them in place, that we're carrying them out. So most folks don't know that the reservation is under continuous regulatory review. We start in December and file a 50-page permit application, and then there are on-site visits, and those can be announced, unannounced, weekend reviews. We have reporting that's weekly, seasonally, and even daily if certain activities occur. So it's quite labor intensive from the regulatory point of view.
Okay, so with all this protection in place for the plovers, why has the oversand portion of the beach been closed seemingly more often the last few years?
Well, it has been closed more often in the last 2 years. And to be honest, each season is just a roll of the dice. Not to sound ridiculous, but it's important to remember that we're working with nature. So that means there are a multitude of factors that constantly change. How many plover pairs arrive? Where's the best habitat? Number of nests, what the weather is, how many eggs are laid, etc. Since every season is different, it's kind of a crapshoot of what's going to happen, if you will. In the past 2 seasons, the birds have hatched a lot of chicks. In some seasons, we lose nests because of overwash, abandonment, predation, but in the last 2 years, we haven't had a lot of those factors. Also, it depends on where the location of the nests and the chicks are. Where they are dictate what our setbacks need to be. So if it's a nest, you don't need as big a setback as a chick because a nest doesn't move, a chick does. So in the past 2 years, the birds have nested either close to a crossover or the chicks have moved in front of those crossovers, requiring them to be closed for a period of time. There's one piece of bird biology I think everybody who goes to the beach should know, and that plovers are renesters. That means their motto is, if you first don't succeed, try again. That means every nest, when lost, the bird will try to re-nest, and that could happen up to 5 times in one season. And now that's really the last thing any of us want, because it extends the bird season and the birds are less successful when they move on to re-nest. So my personal motto is one and done. The birds arrive, they lay their eggs, they raise their chicks, and they leave. So we should all really want to protect that first nest and make sure it's successful, because the season will be shorter.
Okay, well, I appreciate that candor. So we're required to protect the birds, and we have people that are clamoring to go to the beach. Can anything be done to better balance the need for bird protection versus the desire for recreation?
Well, that's the $1 million question, and it's one that we work on throughout the year. The key thing to remember is that Duxbury is a natural barrier beach. It's not developed or armored. What makes it so special is that it's constantly changing. Cobble shows up where we want sand, plovers show up where we want recreation. So the issue is, as I said, we never know when or where the birds are going to set up. So in the fall, DBR staff will start reviewing our permit and looking at our protocols, and then work with the regulators to find opportunities to alleviate stress for both the birds and the public. So for example, last year, we worked with the regulators to create a new protocol for lease turns near the crossovers. That actually allowed the town to reopen the crossover weeks before it had in the past 2 summers. Another example is all the endangered species program staff that everybody sees out on the beach. They work really hard to predict the most precise hatch date, because, as I said, those restrictions increase once the nest hatches. Some folks on different beaches might say, well, it's going to hatch sometime this week. And then the town would have to close it at the beginning of that week. Our folks work to try to figure out within 48 hours when it's going to hatch, which allows the beach to stay open for as long as possible before the nest hatches.
Okay, thanks. There's certainly a lot of very complicated issues to balance here for sure. Let's move to the second topic, um, which is who's who on Duxbury Beach. How do the responsibilities break out between the town and DBR?
So that goes back to, I think it was 1961, when the town started enforcing the beach rules. Since then, the responsibility has transferred among different departments in the town, but stayed within the town. Then in 1990, the first plovers arrived and the town started to manage the bird aspect as well. To boil it down, the town is responsible for beach operations. The town invites folks to the beach by selling stickers. Then the town is responsible for all of the, what I call the people management, which would be enforcement of beach rules, trash disposal. They set the opening and closing times. They make announcements to folks. They hire lifeguards, porta toilets, and a whole bunch of other things I'm probably forgetting. The town is also responsible for the bridge as it's a public right of way to the reservation property. The reservation, on the other hand, is responsible for maintaining the landform and the ecology on that. And then last December, the Duxbury Police Department asked the reservation to take over the bird management as they felt that the police department was not equipped to manage birds. So the reservation took that upon just last summer.
Okay, so the town actually leases the beach from the reservation. So does the lease increase every year? What, from a price standpoint, if you will?
It does. And there's a bit of a story that goes to that as well. You have to take a step back and see historically how the beach was funded. There were three entities that were responsible. It was FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, the town, and the reservation. FEMA covered the cost of storm damage, and the town and the reservation covered all other maintenance and improvements, depending on if it was a section of the town leased or if it was a section the reservation was responsible for. In 2013, Nemo hit, and FEMA announced they were going to cease paying for storm damage. They declared that Duxbury Beach was a recreational beach, kind of out of the blue, and recreational beaches don't qualify for FEMA funding. So this left the reservation and the town with significant expenses. So that was in 2013. In 2015, a blizzard hit, causing more damage. And in light of the expenses going through the roof because of all the storm damage, the town sought to change the terms of the lease to avoid future large expenses due to storms. So at that point, the lease was a partnership between the town and the reservation, and it changed to a landlord-tenant lease, if you will. The reservation agreed to rewrite the lease to relieve the town of their responsibility in exchange for the town's commitment to increase the lease. And there were two parts to it. In 2016, this happened, and the lease went from 400 to 600,000. There was also an agreement to increase each year $50,000 until the lease reached $1 million.
And so where are we on that continuum right now?
The lease that was just signed for July 1st, 2020, that expires on June 30th, 2021, is $850,000. So there's three more $50,000 increments.
And then it's capped.
Well, it didn't say it was going to be capped, but that would be another negotiation. That's not part of the previous one of what's going to happen then.
Okay, so if the town of Duxbury leases the beach from DVR, how come so many non-residents get parking spaces and over sand permits?
Anything else you want to ask?
Just asking.
You're killing me here. For that answer, we have to go back again, but way back. I mean, like the 1800s. So how we came to be, that's really the story. And I don't mean to make a story for each, but you kind of have to understand the background. In the 1800s, the town sold the beach to developers. Their plan was to put over 300 homes down the length of the beach. And it was essentially going to be all private. In 1919, 17 summer residents raised the money to purchase the beach from the developers. I love this part of the story because the total cost was $15,000 to buy the beach. Wouldn't we all do that right now if we could do that? So they purchased it for $15,000. And when they did that, they created a charter, which is what the reservation uses as our mission today. And the charter had three main objectives. I think I've mentioned a couple of them already. It requires the landform to be preserved, the ecosystems protected, and if not in violation of the first two objectives, operated as a recreational beach. Now here's the key, a recreational beach for the benefit of the people of Duxbury and the general public. They wanted to make sure the beach was enjoyed by all because the whole purpose of them purchasing it is that it wouldn't be private and people were restricted when it was developed. In the past, what folks probably don't know is that the state tried to take over Duxbury Beach by eminent domain. And what they did is they stated that it was being run exclusively for Duxbury residents, whereas the state sought to make the beach available to all, like Nantasket Beach. The reservation then used their charter and said, you know, hey, we've been following these rules that we've set up in our charter, and the non-residents of Duxbury are already allowed. So that thwarted the state's attempts to take it over. But if we didn't allow non-resident access, the state could then attempt to take it over again.
Wow, that's important information. Thank you. Okay, so now we've also got Gurnet and Saquewish at the south end of the beach. We had a question about whether you're allowed to walk from Duxbury Beach to Saquewish Beach. Can you help with that?
Yeah, sure. Walking is permitted on our property. I define our property as on the northern end, it starts where the houses stop. So that's the south end of the Duxbury seawall. And it runs through to where the houses start again in Plymouth and Gurnet. So that's a really fancy way of saying you can walk on, walking is permitted on our property all the way down the beach from the seawall to where the homes stop to where the homes start. We just ask that people stay off the dune and adhere to signs and fencing during the warmer months. When you get to the Gurnet guardhouse, if you're on the road, or the rock revetment, the rock wall that's there, then it turns into private property again. And each one of those, I should say other people's private property, and each one of those folks might have their own rules about who can walk on their property. And during the summer also, I should note that the Gurnet Seacoast Corporation hires a security team that works the Gurnet guardhouse. And I'm not sure, to be honest, if they let folks continue to walk on the road because private Saquewish Beach winds up being private as well. So you can at least walk the 4.6 miles down the reservation property.
Okay, so it's 4.6 miles from the north end, bordering Marshfield, all the way down to what is basically the Gurnet Saquewish Guard Shack.
Yeah, it's actually borders Duxbury at our northern end, where the houses end. So it's kind of like when you stop seeing seawall, it's all the reservation's property.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the clarification. Okay, so let's move to the third topic then. Funding. How is DBR funded? Why do the cost and why do the cost of the beach stickers increase, and who gets the benefit of that revenue?
This is a topic that comes up quite a bit. So it's actually pretty simple. The beach stickers, the pricing is set, whether it's increased or stays the same, managed, collected, that's all the town. The town residents parking, I think it started back in 1950-ish. It was actually 23 years prior to the lease being established. So the town has always been collecting that revenue, and they decide what the price is going to be. I know a portion of that revenue pays for the lease of the beach and the management of the town's personnel, so those beach rangers. But the rest of that's all the town of Duxbury.
Okay, are there any portion of our property taxes that we pay to the town that go to the beach?
Okay, we're now wading into me speaking for the town, so I'll answer this as briefly
Okay.
as possible. No, there are no taxes collected for the beach. The fees pay for the work and the lease done on the beach on the town's side.
Okay. Government funding of DBR. Do we get any funding? Do we get any annual funding?
So the short answer for that is no. As I mentioned, 2013 FEMA stopped supporting the beach for restoration after storms. Their last actual payment to us was in 2007. So it's been quite a while since we've received any FEMA funding. Now the reservation needs to raise any money to cover storm damage as well as any proactive work. But we are constantly applying for grants. What we want to do is not just blanketly apply for a grant, but apply for a grant that has to do with specific work that we need. So you need to search for the appropriate grants and then apply for them. Kind of the problem is that the competition has increased through the roof as all coastal towns, throughout the Atlantic coastline are clamoring for the same money. So the pot might get bigger, but definitely the number of folks that are looking to tap into those grants are. But we've been very fortunate to receive several state grants in the past years. That's why private donations are so important, because there is no guaranteed money.
Okay. We got a couple of other questions. There's areas at the beach are very rocky. Are there any plans to remove the rocks or add sand to those areas?
I've heard a million suggestions on how to get rid of the rocks or make it sandier, including even raking the beach. I should just say, if we remove the cobble, I can guarantee you there's cobble underneath it. But in a natural system, the sand moves with the currents. So the sand is continuously being replaced, that's lost to erosion. And where we are on the South Shore, the problem is for Duxbury Beach, we're sediment starved. That means that the currents move north to south on Duxbury Beach. However, most of the coastline north of Duxbury Beach has seawalls or other armoring, and that prevents the natural flow of sand. So yes, we need to bring in sand to replace whatever has eroded. And we definitely have plans to do that. We are filing permits that allows us to put sand or cobble in multiple areas. And as the funding and the material, you need to have the sand, becomes available, we'll do the work.
Okay, well, we've been really lucky seemingly over the last couple of winters because they've been relatively mild. As we approach the stormy season again, can you address what parts of the beach are the most vulnerable?
That's a bit of a tricky one, as I could answer that at many different locations. First, it's important for folks to know that we work with Woods Hole Group, and they help analyze the forces on the beach. So that would be wind, waves, where they're the strongest. And they also look at the beach from where are low-lying areas, what's the narrowest part of the beach. And from that analysis, we figure out where the areas are most vulnerable. So for example, if wind was blowing from east to west, I would say it's probably oceanside at the narrowest parts that are most vulnerable. If we're looking on the bay side, I would say south of Powder Point Bridge. The natural channel comes right into the beach. That would be considered vulnerable. On the bay side, again, immediately north of High Pines, where the big stand of trees is halfway, that's very low lying. And when we have an astronomical high tide and a little bit of a wind, the water will come right over the salt marsh, over the road and across low lying areas. So we're definitely have multiple areas, but it's really dependent on wind, waves, and currents. I mean, in the past, a storm has wiped out entire dune systems at the resident beach or even south of High Pine. So it all depends on what Mother Nature throws at us.
Okay, so as you identify some of the most vulnerable areas, is there anything special we can do to protect those areas?
There is. We are working very proactively rather than reactively to storms, right? We kind of need to get ahead of this situation.
Right.
We know where the areas are that are vulnerable, or we think we have a good educated guess with all of the analysis that was done. So what the reservation has done, instead of filing for one permit at one part of the beach, we have filed for multiple permits through the entire length of the beach. So that way, when our permits come in, we'll be able to stand ready and address what is very vulnerable at that moment. I mean, it's a funny question you ask about the vulnerability, because I'm like, wait 2 days, it could be a different location.
Right.
So it's very important that what we're doing now is that we'll be able not to have to wait for a permit if we have them in hand. And those permits are good for 10 years unless there's some drastic change to the beach. So we'll stand ready to address whatever we need to as quickly as we can get the funding and the materials in.
Okay, so that's a different, more systematic approach to the protection of the beach than we've had in the past. Okay, so what are your concerns going forward then?
I have two major concerns that keep me up at night. I think one is that folks probably don't realize the FEMA funding was lost back in 2013.
Right.
Folks have lived in town multiple generations, and they're used to seeing the beach getting rebuilt after Blizzard of 78, No Name Storm,
Right.
Hurricane Bob 91. It just always goes back. And that's because we had federal funding. Moving forward, any large storms, knock on wood, we wouldn't have that funding. And we really are, we're really dependent on our donations. There will be no state or federal emergency funding that we hear about. So it's important that folks understand that we're a 501c3 and we rely on donations from individuals as well as the grants that we go for. There's also another one, if I can fill that in. So there's a lot of things that keep me up. But the other one is that folks may not understand the true function of Duxbury Beach. It's called a barrier beach for a reason. So it stands to absorb the wind and wave energy that can travel all the way across Cape Cod Bay or Massachusetts Bay. That's either 15 miles of energy piling up or 30 miles if it's Massachusetts. And all that energy hits and gets absorbed and broken down when it hits Duxbury Beach. If Duxbury Beach wasn't there, that energy would continue to travel the last 2 miles across Duxbury Bay and hit the Duxbury coastline. And that would have a significant impact because it's traveling unimpeded that distance. If you look back in March of 2018, we had 3 storms in 2 weeks, 2 nor'easters, and Washington Street, Snug Harbor, they had significant flooding. If the beach wasn't there, the flooding would have been drastically, significantly different. So that's something people have to remember, what its real job is.
Right. Well, you've got an awful lot. You and Duxbury Beach Reservation have an awful lot on your plate. Our time's just about up. And thank you for articulating so many of these issues and answering these questions. Is there anything you want to add before we sign off?
Besides the next series, we should have some softball questions. You know,
right. Oh, okay. All right. Those
easier ones. I would be remiss for speaking about me, but it's not me. There's a huge slew of volunteers that serve as trustees, work on our committees, raise awareness and funds. I'm sure folks that are listening have been part of planting the grass, cleaning the beach, serving as ambassadors. And for 97 years, it was run by volunteers. It's still just amazing to me that how much was accomplished while people were doing other full-time jobs and managing families. It was their volunteer work. But we have a small staff now, but we rely so heavily on our volunteers. And we always welcome folks that want to get involved because we're all working together to preserve and protect the 4.6 miles of barrier beach.
Well, thank you. Much appreciated. And I'd like to thank everybody who tuned in. We hope you found, we hope you found that this was a valuable use of your time. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about or have any additional questions about the beach, you can visit duxburybeach.org. The presentation that we tonight will also be available on our website, and it's going to be shown on PAC TV. The next Get to Know Duxbury Beach presentation will be held after the holiday season. So in the meantime, on behalf of the trustees and the staff at DBR and Chris, we wish you a happy Thanksgiving and a great holiday season. Stay safe and stay healthy. Thanks to all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.